Gotcha. How are you today? You able to get my slides up? My name's Gary Hodgden, and I'm the Secretariat for the Consensus Standards. I call that Consensus Facilitator. And what I end up doing is putting a bunch of people in a room, putting some text up. We argue again, we change the text, we argue it again. They come from all different walks of life. It's kind of a social experiment where we put people that have 2 or 3 PhDs together into a room of people who chose to work with their hands. And is that me? It's not, it's spam risk. I don't know if you guys get that deal, but anyway, and it turns out that at the end of the day that everybody's really smart. And we're all really stupid about a few things, no matter which side of the coin you came from. And after arguing and then arguing again, we end up with something that everybody can agree with, and that's what we do here at the Consortium of Standards. The arguments happen at the bottom of this screen in those committees. Once we get done arguing and actually agree on something, it flows up to the supervising committees, and ANSI gets to audit whether or not we were fair to everybody and that, and then you end up with a publication. We're associated with the ISO. I found myself on some ISO committees. ISO, I think you heard before about the 17024 projects. I think, you know, one of the things wanted to tie in together is that our product here, as well as what I heard Dallas this morning about the NRPP shows, our product of all this is actually a thing called trust. It has to do with clients trusting us and what we do. It has to do with you guys trusting the credentials that get done and the public trusting it. And that's really what this all comes from. These are, you'll notice that we're in revisions on most things. Most every date on these different standards are within the last 3 years of revision of one sort or another. And that's kind of the status where we are. And here's where the trust comes in. I am not so pretty to have the HUD people say, yeah, Gary, yeah, bring it in. We love your stuff. Or nobody paid money under the table for this. That's not how this works. They trust what we did, or they wouldn't be recommending all these standards we did. And that's how this works. It's no different than when you go to clients to sell us a service, and you have to gain their trust, or they don't buy in. Now, to understand, you know, what are going on in the classroom, how many people have done or are involved in doing multifamily schools, large buildings? How many people in the room are in that game? Okay. Good. How many people in the room for vapor intrusion in one way or the other? Okay, yeah. So this is supposed to be on large buildings, but it really ends up being kind of a status report of where we are, because we're merging, harmonizing, and doing work on all 3 of these mitigation standards. The 2 on your right are the large building standards, and then the single families on the left. All of this built on EPA stuff since the 1990s, the science that was done then. And each of these standards were created by different groups of people. And then and now, we've learned a lot over those years, just by trial and error. And that comes into that. So some people who've only been taught in classes what was really EPA's 1994 guidance are going to find some new things in here, a lot of things that may seem surprising and probably not really you know, off the imagination chart, but, you know, some different things. Well, right now we have a mitigation standing committee, and this allows us to look at all 3 of the standards, and they're tasked to improve and harmonize all 3 of the standards. Now, the harmonization word is all about describing a process where nothing's conflicting from one standard to the other. In fact, it's so much so that we're able to, with one committee, make the exact same sentences. and that sort of thing, so that we don't have to worry about things. But basically conflicting within these standards and adding on to the conflicts of things we've learned since the last 5 years when we were running through it. And so that's what's going on with those. We even get the sentences the same. And there's that little FYI is one of those exam questions that supposedly you'd get extra 4 credits if you get 100% off this exam for the whole show here. And why would we care about getting all the sentences the same? Because to get all the learn the requirements using the same words for the same requirement across all the standards makes it easy to remember what the requirements are. So that's the type of work we're doing, as well as this. One of the things that the stakeholders in our community, because we're part of it, they're part of us, are the clients, people who inspect systems. We heard about the inspection credential earlier, but this is a whole different ballgame of what I'm talking about. Our previous standards, we're trying to make sure we gave requirements that were reasonable and added sentences that kind of explained those as you went along, so it didn't seem so foreign. However, we found that the guidance sentences stated right next to the requirement causes confusion. And I now have proof of that experiment, that question. It's taking forever to get anything agreed to when all we're looking at is the shall statements. They're bold, they're crude, they're unfriendly, and yet from a standpoint of the compliance inspectors, they relieve all the confusion. And actually, the truth is, another one of those FYIs, why would it be important to be what they call prescriptive language or performance-based language? It adds clarity to you when you're designing things. There's no muddled up text. It reduces confusion for the people inspecting, like homeowners and other inspectors. And it also improves the ability for more jurisdictions to adopt standards and thereby increase radon awareness. And so the people who raised their hand saying they were working on some of the large building, they've now graduated into this thing where you might even have a retirement plan compared to the guys like us who only worked on single-family homes. You can actually make some money in this. You can lose money too. You got to remember that. If you could make $100,000 on one project and lose $100,000 on the next, that's this game. But it's all part of that. So I'm trying to move along quickly so we catch on schedule and everything else. But we made an update publication to all of these standards where we harmonized things and got ahead and put it out last year, early in the year. Some of the basic things were content reorganization, so they all kind of had the same chapter name for the same topic. And we may and eventually, we're looking for 2022 publications, but we mostly did harmonize and made sure we got harmonized most of the ASD sections so that most all of that across there is the same text for the same task. And the ceiling is now identical. We got a few things left in ASD and a few improvements to make there too, but and then most of the Section 8 of the all systems, such as the fan monitors and the labeling, you've heard discussion about the labeling in previous presentations here. I'm jumping right to one of the things that would not be known, even though it's published, not really known well. I wanted to explain it. This is a new situation on exhausts. And to understand it, this is from an ASHRAE 62.1. It's based on a study that cost buco bucks that somebody did. And their study here, on the right of that is a box. It's an HVAC system with a motorized air intake. And then how close could they locate that motorized air intake to an exhaust plume that's rated as kicking out some very toxic plumes. And they've got all the calculations. This organization has a million equations. You can put everything else just like some other organizations. And the inverse is, how close can we put the exhaust plume to the air intake? And this is how the calculations were worked out. What we've got here, and published in 2018 for multifamilies, but it's now in a single family, so it's harmonized over. And this is only a 3D, this is a two-dimensional picture, but what you're really looking at is a three-dimensional cone of exhaust coming off of the exhaust point. The gray areas in that cone, the center portion where it shoots further distance, and then it's off to the side, the 45-degree access. These are all places where the pollutant or the radon is more potent and stays in this. They call it a Gaussian plume. And again, this air shall not strike, the air there cannot contain openings in structures, building materials, and the breathing spaces where people may congregate or traverse. And if you start thinking of the VI and throwing vapors out here, all of that's important. Hitting the building materials can either rot the building, or you could actually shoot it up into the joists underneath of a eave. And as some studies has found, 40 picocuries inside because of a slit along the side of the roof. So you just point it differently. Now, it ends up that those calculations are about the same as we had for 30 years. Pretty much the 10-foot, 2-foot rule distances, but you're thinking of a cone-shaped spread of air rather than just that. And so we're still requiring going above the edge of the roof. However, we have allowances that have caveat requirements for going below the edge of the roof. Now, why would that be important for a 30-story building? We don't want to have to take a pipe 10 stories up if there's a place we can safely discharge it lower. But there's caveats, and this one drawing to the right of the up, down, and down, I remember having a code discussion with the guy, and he's there for electricity, but he wants to write up the exhaust too because it might let rain down inside. And I go, no, here's a picture. Any event, 10 foot relative to the exhaust spread. This pictures aren't showing that really, but it's pointing out 10 foot above ground, 10 feet to the sides of windows, 10 feet away from people on the side of a deck, 10 people above the people in the lower deck below it, and that sort of thing. There was one thing in that picture that I was pointing out. The one change is something to do with the above the windows, if you will. It's a 4-foot rule. However, it's not 4 foot above the window frame. It's just like that drawing you saw where the mechanical air intake is sucking air in. It's 4 foot away from where the air is going in, which is the window. Doors and things may have it different, but you can see a very common thing that's where the storm windows are closing off half of that. So 4 foot above that, the edge of the lower window that gets opened all the time. That's how this is. That's how those calculations worked out. So it's still pretty much the same. This one here, if you think of if you're doing a 90-degree exhaust, this one does have the circular pattern of where the spread is. And essentially, we don't want any of that exhaust, even off to the side, to 45 degrees, to be hitting people in the head with radon or vapor chemicals. So a 90-degree exit needs to get up 20 feet in the air, okay, even if it's above the roof. So these are some things I thought I'd make sure I covered with you because it affects the large buildings, but it affects most everything you'd be doing. It's very much the same. It gets real easy to later to go, oh yeah, my finger, I just point it, and I know where it's okay to point this stuff. But the calculations work out that if you're doing larger than 3 or 4 inch exhausts, where you can be moving 2 or 3 times more air at a 2 or 3 times further distance, these numbers increase. You may have to end up 20 feet to the side of a window if you're blowing out 10-inch pipe. The minimum that you could blow straight across to another house at their windows is 20 feet. But if you're blowing this much air or this out of a 10-inch or an 8-inch, you may need to be 40 feet away from that house before it turns and blows over at it. So I just wanted to cover that because it's one of the ones that probably people haven't had training classes on before because of the hard to get all of this over, and the training and all the new credential delays and complications. Other things that are in there, the owner-occupied maintenance is a difference from the independent maintenance. So there's a bunch of stuff breaking off that way. It's not really so much whether it's a single-family building or multifamily. When you're getting into your documentation, who is the person who's going to read the documentation? So if it's someone who's independent maintenance or maintenance on the, by the school district, or, it's different documentation than what you give the homeowner. Pretty much the same content, but they call it the O&M manual rather than an information packet. The beloved active alert monitors. How many people beloved the active alert monitor idea? I'm not seeing any raised hands. Well, we have plenty of products now. There's about 5 more I've seen over next door than I took these pictures of. This harmonizes from the single family standard over to the large building standard, okay? And I think it's worth giving some history on how this happened. This came up during vapor intrusion discussions where virtually a national requirement for all vapor intrusion. For the scientists that were there, you heard earlier about some of the distances, how much more dangerous radon is. Every concern that's on your mind has been argued at least twice between this group. We're a very vocal group. Takes forever to get a lot of things done. And yeah, it's going to be a while. Part of it was going to be a while for having good products that you trust and that work for you. Before anybody in a field, a realtor ever says, I got gypped because I don't have my monitor. But it's, as verified here, we've got 10 different ballots across 4 different committees across 5 years. And this consensus remains strong. We all know the situations of going in, the inspector said the fan needs replaced. I don't know why, because the radon's 0. Look at this gauge, it's a 0 radon. How could it be there? We all know hundreds of times, at least I've hundreds of times, heard those types of things, and most people have. We're getting again into some of the trust areas, the improvement of the industry, and the ongoing question at this point for those committees is, should there be more requirements on these? And yet the product improvement is actually in your hands. It has to do with you contacting or choosing by which ones you purchase, whether or not you get a good product that works. We're already in this game that people talk about would we get a call during the winter or freeze up, or would we get a call during the rain? And everybody's been here. I mean, we now have the cheap monitors in the people are buying for $130 or whatever, and you're getting a call. You're having to deal with it already. It's not new. It's like it's here. And it's time to maybe be in front of that game. Change whatever business contracts you're giving out and have something that's respectful for the people. It's here. And so it's not that the consensus can't be turned around on this. It's just in 5 years of ballots, and it seems to be holding. Just letting you know that's where this is. And the reason why, obviously it's better protecting families and cancer, like I said, all the different reasons why. We put in I'm told we're to put in 1 million fans now. If we had 1 million fans in and everybody knew they were dead, you'd be replacing more fans every day than you'd be installing. That's not happening. So from an industry standpoint, the more fans you replace that are protecting people, you're doing their job, you're making more money, it's a parallel market. In the future, it's a win-win, but it's going to be some transition over time. Work progress for updating for the 2022, which will be a publication probably late 2022. One thing is we're going to plan to split these 3 documents into only 2. The harmonization process is revealing that almost everything about schools and multifamily and large commercial buildings is all pretty much the same requirement once you start streamlining and cutting some stuff back. In fact, the single-family requirements almost all identical too. But it'd be a little less confusing to, let some of the main requirements in. So anyway, more explicit work on qualifications, general post-mitigation stuff, health and safety practices. All these things are in the works over the next 6 months. How many people, I asked a chemical vapor intrusion. One last thing about the FYI for your exam. The standards relative to chemical vapor intrusion only address the mitigation of occupant exposure to radon and chemical vapors that would otherwise intrude into the building. We're not ever, I don't think, going to get into the business of characterization, handling, removal of source contaminants below, the whole soil vapor extraction thing. But we can keep those people protected in the buildings. And I think I'm out of time, and it's time to stop. Thank you very much.